Hey everyone, it's Raghu, and I'm back with Mindrolling, and I'm with now, well, I can say he's an old friend since we met a couple of years ago. Cortland Dahl. Cortland, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's great to be back with you.
Cortland, just to remind, he co-founded Tergar Foundation. What's the official?
The organization is called Tergar International, but really it's a meditation community.
Okay. But the big news is, of course, this is dedicated to Mingyur Rinpoche, who many of us love. And if you've been listening to Mindrolling, you know we quote him a lot. And he's been on Mindrolling a couple of times. And that's not all of it. Cortland has translated many Tibetan texts, and I think last time we were on, you talked about how you lived in the East and managed to learn Tibetan, and now, is this the first book of its type? He put together a Meditator's Guide to Buddhism, The Path of Awareness, Compassion, and Wisdom. Is that the first one?
Yeah, I've published many books of translations. This is the first one I've written myself, and actually, I had no intention to do it. It kind of came about quite unexpectedly, but yeah, it is.
How so?
Well, I was approached by a woman named Casey Kemp, who was an editor at Shambhala Publications, which is one of the big publishers of books on meditation and Buddhism.
Yeah.
And she just reached out to me, kind of just called me up. I actually didn't know her prior to this. And she reached out to me and asked if we could talk. So we hopped on a call, and she asked if I would be interested in writing an introductory book about Buddhism. And at first I said no, not because I wasn't interested, but really I just didn't have a lot of time. And we struck up a conversation, and after a little pushing and prodding, I decided to do it. So I didn't, it just kind of came about somewhat spontaneously.
Yeah, there's some great things in this book. Very healthy. You don't have to be even a Buddhist. You don't have to be. There is just some great balance advisals, or a way of looking at things a little differently in this book. So, but before we even talk about some of this stuff, if you don't know who Mingyur Rinpoche is, it's someone good to take, Google up or or go to the site, Tergar site, and we'll have all of those links, of course, in the show notes. And I don't even care if we're going to duplicate a little bit of what we did a year ago or so, whatever it was. And this is around Rinpoche. And just, your meeting with him, and how, I know that this is when you were in the East for a while. You met him there.
Yeah, I met him in Kathmandu.
In Kathmandu, where he has a center, and also one in Bodh Gaya, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. He has a monastery in Kathmandu, Bodh Gaya. Those are the two main ones. Yeah. One in, the historical one is in Tibet, of course, and then meditation groups and centers all over the world.
He's someone very special. He is part of a family of an extraordinary family. Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche is the dad, one of the great meditation teachers of the last 150 years or something. I mean, I think he taught His Holiness the Dalai Lama as well. And they had 4 sons: Mingyur, Tsoknyi Rinpoche, Choki Nima, and then one that I guess wasn't as well known, and I don't remember.
Chokling Rinpoche, yeah, he actually passed away not too
recently.
Long ago.
Yeah. But just tremendous teachers, and many of us have taken teachings from them. Part of our family, like people like Krishnadas and Sharon Salzberg, and so on. And then I noticed in your at the end of the book, recommended books for meditation, right? Every one of those books I would have put down. I mean, we are in simpatico there. But one of them in particular, I've been quoting a lot from. It's Danny Goleman and Tsoknyi Rinpoche, How to Meditate. And let's put the show notes, guys, people, gals, please, let's put a link there for that book. And I also loved Altered Traits that he did with Richie Davidson, right?
Yeah,
so,
that's a great book.
Yeah. Anyhow, some good stuff there. Okay, but just thinking about being in the East and being in Nepal or India for that matter, and for me it's like a huge breath that you take and let out, and here I am, and really the ability to be more present with yourself there as a retreat, no matter what, is very present, very present. What was it like when you actually met Mingyur Rinpoche? And the kind of effect he had that led you to do this kind of work with him for quite decades, really.
Yeah, it was quite an interesting meeting, actually. I had two, probably, really, I've had many wonderful teachers in my life. I've been very, very fortunate to meet a lot of remarkable people and have received teachings from a lot of amazing people. But two in particular I would consider really almost like my heart teachers, Mingyur Rinpoche, of course, and another Lama who passed away a few years ago named Chopo Rinpoche, who was one of the great Dzogchen masters, for those familiar with that term. And I had met Chopo Rinpoche when he was very old. He was in his 90s. He was probably, I think, 93 or 94. And I had met him a year or two before I met Mingyur Rinpoche. And he wasn't really actively teaching, so I met him and I received, some very pithy teachings and received some practices, which I started doing in retreat. But it was a little bittersweet because it was like I had met him at the tail end of his teaching career. He was a very reclusive Lama. He was known for being a hermit. He had spent like 40 years living in caves, and just a remarkable, like truly, truly awakened being. Just to be around him was just extraordinary. But he was very old. And when I met Mingyur Rinpoche a little while after that, I just felt like I was meeting a young Chopo Rinpoche. It felt like no different to me other than it was just in a younger body or something.
Very young, right?
Yeah, he was very young at the time.
30s.
He and I are almost the same age. He's I think maybe 1 or 2 years younger. And I just turned 50, so that means when we met, we were probably both in our late 20s. Or we would have been probably in our 20, he probably was 25, 26, and I was a year or two older than that, obviously. And it was funny because I was completely heads down studying Tibetan at the time. I wasn't, looking for teachers. I wasn't even really receiving that many teachings at the time. There's so much going on over there in Kathmandu. If you're interested in Buddhism and meditation, that it can be... In a way, it sounds weird to say this, but almost distracting. If you got to kind of stay focused on whatever you're doing. But so I just by chance met him, and I met him at the strangest place. It's really the oddest story to meet one of your, most important teachers. I was living on next to nothing at the time. So I had rented a room. I think it cost like $30 a month. And I was sleeping on a foam mat in my sleeping bag. I had a $5 old rickety wooden desk and chair, and literally living on like next to nothing. And the house I was living in it had running water, but it didn't have cold water, and it can get very cold, in
hot water.
It didn't have hot. Sorry, thank you. It didn't have hot water, so it was pretty brutal to stay clean. But just by chance, they had just built a fancy new hotel nearby, like a Hyatt hotel, strangely, in this area called Bodhanath, where I lived. And they had some deal where you could go for like $30 a month, and they'd let you just use the spa. So I could go in and get a hot shower. And that was where I met Mingyur Rinpoche. I went in there one day, and I was kind of famous in the area because I was always carrying around little flashcards, like I was memorizing Tibetan words because I was like fanatically learning Tibetan. And I was sitting there, and I think I went into this sounds so funny, but I was actually in the steam bath at the Hyatt Hotel, and in walks Tsoknyi Rinpoche, who you mentioned. This is Mingyur Rinpoche's brother, another great teacher. And Mingyur Rinpoche, who not only had I never met, I'd never heard of him. I'd never even heard of him before. So they walk in, but they're not in monk's robes or lama's robes. They're wearing towels. You know, they're just two Tibetan dudes in towels. So it's totally like out of context.
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
And I didn't know Mingyur Rinpoche at all. I didn't know Tsoknyi Rinpoche well. I had seen him at a teaching once in Boulder, Colorado, but that was like years before. And to make a long story short, basically Tsoknyi Rinpoche kind of made fun of me the whole time. We were like joking around. He at one point threw a glass of water on me, and for the life of me, I can't remember what prompted that or why he did it, but that happened. Mingyur Rinpoche was much more reserved and quiet, and I didn't have any heart-opening moment, any crazy thing like that. But what happened was, about 2 months after that, I was at this monastery in that area, actually his brother's monastery, and I was taking a class on Buddhism at the time at this monastery. And there was a bulletin board in this hallway. I can remember it perfectly. And on that bulletin board one day appeared a newsletter that had a story about Mingyur Rinpoche. And it had his picture, and it had a story about his life, which is extraordinary. His life is extraordinary. He'd done like 10 years of retreat by the time he was 20. He had panic attacks as a kid, all this dramatic life story, you know. Yeah. And I read about his retreat, and I just immediately, I saw that picture, and I thought, oh, that's who I met. And I immediately felt this wave of devotion and was like, oh, I've got to study with him. I hope I can reconnect with him. And just on the spot, I started making aspirations in my mind, like, may I meet you again? May I study with you? May I, receive teachings from you? All just in my mind was just sort of spinning with these positive aspirations. And making aspirations is a very kind of traditional Buddhist practice. And the next day...
you'd have to say, Cortland, this is probably, with many different names, a practice in every mystical tradition. Because without that inner inspiration, I would call it, and then tuning in, to the trust part of ourselves, where a thought comes and we make this aspiration because it feels completely 100%. I think that's important. It's
so true. It's so powerful, and especially when you link it to that kind of heart-mind space, like in the moment, just this kind of overflowing of emotion, and then almost like giving voice to that. It's just such a beautiful, powerful thing. And then this is I haven't told that many people this story, but the very next day I went to the Hyatt again, and I walk in, and Mingyur Rinpoche literally is sitting in the locker room, but this time by himself. Huh. And and that was it. We started talking, and I mean, of course, I was just floored. I mean, and it's funny too, because to this day, I know him very well. I've, studied with him for decades and worked very closely with him. I never have known him to go to that hotel before or since. So it's kind of weird how this all happened.
That's great.
But anyways, there's a whole story that played out after that. But yeah, that was how we first connected. It was definitely one of these weird moments that you never could have imagined.
That's so great. This is kind of, we're talking about someone who, you would, call him, well, you would say he's a guru to you, no?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Absolutely, right?
Yeah.
And so I was going to leave this till, not to the end, but I love this section on, and I'm just going to it, the guru principle. I mean, I've read, I love Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, and I never got to meet him. It's one of those things. I mean, I can't complain because I met so many incredible beings, as you did, but he really emphasized the guru.
Yeah.
And guru, when you say that word, it's funny because you say in here, well, it's kind of hard to talk devotion and guru. You know that Ram Dass, when he first came back from India the first time, and he had just met Neem Karoli Baba. And he started talking. He wasn't supposed to talk about him, but that's a whole other story. But he said, there's a few things I find it very difficult to talk about to a Western audience. And he started listing them. Guru, devotion, surrender. These are impossible. And it's kind of funny, the way you express that yourself in the book.
Yeah, it's so true.
But I love the Longchenpa quote, this excellent path, unmistaken when it comes to cause and result, comes from following true masters. So, many people have a real problem with those concepts, right? Guru, devotion, surrender, here in the West. And I think it's really a great thing to delve into, which you do here beautifully, by the way. And when you talk about Panlap Rinpoche, he's still alive, is he not?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Krishnadas said to me, you should find out where you can get with Panlap Rinpoche because it's beautiful. But tell us about the way that you were sort of very, very cynical about that concept and how that changed.
Yeah, I was not one of these people who connected with the more traditional side of things and immediately grokked it and resonated with it. I was the opposite. I had so many hang-ups, was resistant in a million different ways. And I'm embarrassed to say this, that I read a book about meditation and Buddhism, and I got really excited. And then I read a book by the Dalai Lama, and it's embarrassing to say this because it's the Dalai Lama. Who has an adverse reaction to the Dalai Lama? But I did. I read a book by the Dalai Lama, and it completely turned me off. It wasn't the Dalai Lama. It was something about this book was very traditional, and I just wasn't ready for it. It was too traditional. I had no interest in religion. I certainly had no interest in a guru, and I mean even the word just freaked me out. So I was a John Kabat-Zinn guy, mindfulness, being present. For me, I needed it just very simple, very ordinary, and that was what allowed me just to find my way into this tradition. It really wasn't until I got to Boulder, Colorado, which was a number of years later, and I met actually Panlap Rinpoche, who you mentioned, and another great teacher named Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso Rinpoche. And it was just the presence of these people that was so inspiring, and it was just undeniable. Like, okay, there's something going on here. I have all these questions, and I'm so skeptical and a little jaded, but the people just moved me being around them. I mean, when you're around some of these people, it's just everything you hope for as a human being. They're light. They're so just visibly comfortable in their own skin. They're kind. They're caring. They're funny. They're wise. I mean, just everything you could imagine just wrapped up in one person. And then there's just the presence, which you can't really put into words. And so I met some of these people, and that for me, I think, is what switched. I wouldn't say it's overnight. Like, I just immediately became interested in the more traditional side of things. But I opened up, and I started to explore it a little bit more seriously. And I think now it's interesting because now I'm so immersed in not only the world of meditation and have been very immersed deeply in the tradition, but also in the world of scientific research. And it's kind of interesting to me that now I see that actually this is just how the brain works. Actually, we learn anything through our relationships. Somehow we're in this weird moment of history where we think we learn everything through information, and we're used to getting a lot of information, but I wouldn't put a percentage on it, but certainly some huge percentage of what we learn is simply by being around and observing other human beings. Starting very early when we're infants, that's how we learn basically everything about being human, is just watching our parents and watching other people. Yeah. But it's true with other things. If you're learning to play the piano, or you want to be a good basketball player, or whatever it is, you have role models. You see people who just epitomize whatever it is you're interested in, and it's sort of how we learn. So I think for me, it's been very gradual, but now that I would say I'm on the other side of that and have been more deeply immersed in the tradition, I can just see that it certainly has pitfalls, and there's a lot of reasons to go slowly and have a healthy skepticism, but yet it can be so, so powerful, when you have that kind of relationship with the teacher.
I think it's the discrimination part you're speaking to is extraordinarily important, especially for people like us in the West. We have certain modes of operation, shall we say, success and greater and lesser. We have all of this terrible inside ourselves polarization. Basically, terrible is a bad word, but we do have it. And for myself, I think I understood that was part of my unhappiness when I was young, before I went to India, before I met Ram Dass. And I was really looking for a solution. I couldn't really speak to the question the way I'm thinking now. That was really part of it, just feeling of separation. And that I couldn't, enunciate that in terms of that separation was inside me first and foremost. And so when I finally did get to India through Ram Dass, and I met Neem Karoli Baba, I remember I had several thoughts go through quickly. I mean, home was one of them. And by the way, I want to quote Salje Rinpoche, we are all homesick, right? So holy God, there's nothing going on here. The duality that I normally and always expect to experience with another human being is absent here. There isn't a me and a him as far as he was concerned, and that allowed me to be in that space, and that's what happened to us on a day-to-day basis. Exactly what you're saying. We just were in that aura, and that aura allowed us to relax and it's okay. All right, we don't have to have this polarization going on inside ourselves, So super important. But I think for everybody out there listening, and, we just had a retreat in, as I mentioned, or did I mention, in Boone, North Carolina. And that came up around, you guys all, I was with, I don't know if do you know who David Nichtern is? A wonderful student of Trungpa Rinpoche.
But I know of him.
Yeah. So he was speaking to it from the Buddhist point of view. And we were speaking to it from our experience with Neem Karoli Baba. And ultimately, the reality, what you say is so true that we are bouncing on, in one of those kids bounce things against each other, with each other, and in that process, a light happens. An opening is created by virtue of our aspiration that you were speaking to earlier. And that happened there. And we just said, look, I guess the most cogent thing that I've heard recently in terms of this particular subject is Thich Nhat Hanh. The next Buddha is the Sangha.
Yeah, I love that quote.
Yeah. And that seems to be what happens with us. And that presence is beyond, for us, beyond just a man in a blanket, who did all this miraculous stuff. I mean, I think I told you this last time we talked, I met 16th Karmapa, maybe 15, 12 years or so after Neem Karoli Baba died. And I was just completely taken by the reality that there was no difference between these two whatevers you want to call them. In India they would call them siddhas. Right? Yeah. They were beyond polarity, still able to live in a human body, which apparently that's not such an easy thing to do. So I really appreciated, Cortland, how you spoke to guru and devotion. This is what you said. Words like guru and devotion raise a lot of red flags in this day and age, and for good reason. In principle, this is no different than mentoring relationships in other areas of life, and particularly when you go on to talk about athletes. Everybody really can understand that process. And it speaks also to nothing happens. I mean, I think of tennis because I'm totally into tennis, and there's a big, U.S. Opens happening next week. And nothing can happen without practice.
Yeah.
And these people devote themselves in a way that's extraordinary. Now, whatever their motivations may be, but the reality is there's not much different in terms of how we would have a mentor and we would have trust, and then that would motivate us towards practice. Maybe you can speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, it's a great example, and it's interesting you mentioned sports, because I feel like since I've become more attuned to the role that the relationships play in our lives generally, and then how much that power is harnessed in the spiritual path, I see it everywhere. So, the Olympics were just on recently.
Yeah, right.
And I could just imagine, like Simone Biles or somebody, you could just see somebody who's a true master of their craft. So Simone Biles, almost just otherworldly, clearly talented, but otherworldly discipline and skill that she has trained for an entire lifetime. And you just know that seeing her, like as you watch her, and that there's tens of millions of people all over the world, and you can just imagine all these little girls and boys all around the world who are just seeing that, and suddenly some spark of potential is awakened in them. Like how many gymnastics club signups happened in the day after a great performance by somebody like Simone Biles.
Yeah.
And in some respects it's very different, but in some respects it's not. I think it's a lot of what you just pointed to. You need that spark of inspiration, which it doesn't always have to be you meet somebody face to face. It can be like, for me, you mentioned Longchenpa, like one of the great towering figures of Tibetan Buddhism who lived in the 14th century. I mean, just reading a few words of Longchenpa is as inspiring to me as any person I've ever met, even my most cherished teachers. So it can happen many ways. But then there's how do you nurture that spark? Because it's not going to last. If you just let it go from there, it's going to fizzle out. It's just the habits, the winds of life are gonna blow it out. And so it needs to be nurtured. And that's basically what practice is. That's what daily meditation and the spiritual path and all the things we do are basically just nurturing that little spark of inspiration that happens. And that's why we need the people in our lives. I mean, if we just saw everybody as just ordinary, deluded, as confused as we are, and we read some book and like, she's as messed up as I am, and he's as messed up as I am. I mean, if that's how we viewed the world, we would never be able to break out of the way we see ourselves, right? We'd never be able to shift the self-perception. And I think that's the beauty of these traditions. You kind of described it, when you met Neem Karoli Baba, certainly my experience around these teachers, is you just get this glimpse that we have no clue of just this depth and richness that is inside of us. And it's like how we stumble through life completely oblivious to this amazing qualities of mind, and somehow we just haven't learned to see it. I mean, and then you meet a teacher and it's like it gets cracked open a little bit, and you just start getting a glimpse of that just by being in their orbit. It's extraordinary. And then that's just the path. It's just chipping away at that crack until all the light comes out.
Yeah. That quote, which that was a long Longchenpa. I want to start with this, go back to this quote, which is Salje Rinpoche. I don't know who he is, actually.
That's one of Mingyur Rinpoche's main, totally unknown, outside of just hearing from Mingyur Rinpoche. But
really?
Yeah, another great enlightened master, kind of hidden yogi.
Yeah. It's amazing. The plethora of extraordinary people. Humans from Tibetan tradition. We are all homesick. This is Salje Rinpoche. that's the key that we all need to really, really understand.
Yeah,
Although our true home is within, we do not recognize this, and we seek happiness outside ourselves. And you use this to kick the age of anxiety, is what this is called in the very beginning of the book. And just describe our reality now. It's no accident that so many of us feel like we are in a race that never ends. In this age of anxiety, we are barraged with information from the time we wake up in the morning to the time we drift off to sleep. Our devices have become extensions of our being, so much so that we rarely turn them off. As a result, we ourselves never switch off. The closest we get to a moment of true rest is to lose ourselves in distraction. I'm reading this thing as I first read it, and I'm like, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, as Ram Dass used to say, are we so immersed wherever you walk in any public place? The reality of this is extraordinary. How this extension of ourselves, it's really so, everybody out there. That's why a meditator's guide to Buddhism, and although yes, this is based that way, on the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, but inside of it is many, many different ways in which, Cortland, you help understand that a shift in perspective is very meaningful. Pointing to a few of the things, you recommend 3 different things in the journey, spiritual path. The first is curiosity. Can you? I'm totally with you. Curiosity leads to inspiration, leads to a passion for what His Holiness calls having an altruistic perspective in your life, and so on. But talk to us about curiosity.
Yeah, I thought that was so important to mention right out of the gate, because we have so much programming in our lives that is telling us we're not enough, we don't have enough, just on every level, and so much focus on what we're lacking that we start looking at life as just an endless list of problems we need to solve and shortcomings we need to fix. And the challenge is that when we come to meditation, we can view it that same way. It's like, oh, now meditation, and unconsciously we think, oh, meditation, it's maybe a more effective tool to fix all these things I hate about myself, or to give me to finally feel comfortable in my own skin. But it's really what's underneath that, even though we're meditating and doing all the right things, the underlying mindset and assumptions about who and what we are kind of the same. So it's like a brighter, shinier version of kind of the same pile of crap. And I think curiosity is so helpful because it just shifts out of that mindset where we're kind of fixated on our flaws and trying to, even just the project of self-improvement, because this is not self-improvement. That's the whole premise of this whole path, and many paths, not just the Buddhist view of this, is that we're not trying to fix the stuff that's broken. We're getting in touch with the parts of ourselves that were never broken to begin with. Yeah. We're getting in touch with that fundamental wholeness. But we can't do that with the mindset that we're broken. You can't, you're just going to kind of keep banging your head against the same wall. So curiosity just shifts us out of self-improvement mode and into self-discovery mode. And it's challenging, I think, because the mind slips back into, I could be a little better, I got to fix this, my mind could be a little calmer, or I could be more balanced, or I could be less distracted, whatever it is. And curiosity just has a way of short-circuiting that whole cycle and just no, let's just, like a little kid is exploring some interesting new thing. Just explore it. And then you're going to start seeing things that were there all the time, but you just hadn't learned to see them.
Yeah. But realizing, of course, that we do have this way in which we turn things that will fit within our story of who we think we are.
Yeah.
Which I did an audiobook with my friend Duncan Trussell, the movie of me to the movie of we, may have mentioned last time. And that's really understanding our neurotic tendencies, our habitual patterns are going to use, spiritual bypass is the common term that's used, but all we need is to just have a little bit of a light that we can shine on ourselves through mindfulness, around
just
the motivation.
even a willingness to look is
even
a tremendous act of courage, even if you still have the old beliefs. And for me, you've heard me tell this story, but I had tremendous amount of crippling social anxiety when I was first began practicing. And the views I had about myself, I viewed myself, I didn't have this terminology, but I viewed myself as just kind of fundamentally broken. I just got dealt a bad hand and I'm just an anxious person. That's just how I am. It wasn't even an option that this could be something that might shift or change. It wasn't even, but I think through meditation, just a willingness to look, even though I still believed all the same things I had always believed, just a willingness to say, all right, they're saying, John Kabat-Zinn is saying, all right, just look, you don't have to just observe it, just be with it. And that's the beginning of the end for all those old stories. It's not necessarily overnight, but I think it's just that willingness to hang with it and look and begin to get curious. It's amazing how much curiosity can do if you give it time.
Yeah. And the second thing you talk about here is patience, which is my bugaboo, particularly. Talk about
and the
patience,
entirety
patience.
of the modern world. Patience is not exactly our strong suit these days.
Yeah, to say the least. But what is your how does this fit in to your practice in particular?
I think for me, what this looks like is creating space. Just creating space. I was going to say for something to happen, but even that's too much. Because that's it, right? Something's going to happen now, so I'm going to create space, and then something better happen, or otherwise I got to do something else. And that's just it. So I think it's around in the simplest terms, being versus doing. And again, meditation, spiritual practice, we're also compulsively doing in our lives that we bring that same habit of mind into spiritual practice, when I think a lot of it is just being and just creating that open space. And then just it's being and allowing, because the stuff that we're talking about, the most profound insights and transformations, all the stuff that happens on the path, it's never stuff you can do. It's never stuff you can script. You can follow all the instruction manuals to perfection and it's not going to happen. It's something that you just have to let go, trust. And I think being is both the most challenging and yet the most nourishing and fulfilling part of the whole process. So I think patience for me is a lot of that. It's just letting go of the control, trying to force something, trying to have a clear expectation, wanting some special state of mind to happen, and instead just being open and just being here and just letting it happen.
You say letting go sounds good in theory, but when it actually happens, it can feel like we're losing part of ourselves. This is why it often takes patience to see the journey through. As you just said, the path is rarely predictable. But that just reminds me of, in terms of letting go, and then we start to use that really tough word, surrender. And then, of course,
funny it's such an important word, and so rarely you don't hear it a lot. And I think there's a reason why we don't talk about it. It's kind of a threatening,
totally,
sort of threatening at a deep level.
Yeah, it's so much so. We were doing retreat. Well, when Ram Dass was alive, we did a lot of retreats in Maui. We still do them actually, and several times his Indian brother, actually the man who translated for him when he first met Neem Karoli Baba in the Himalayas. They became so close. So we had, we always have a theme, and I think part of the thing was trust, surrender, and, open space, something like that. So he said to us, sorry, you in the West, you have no idea. What you think is surrender has nothing to do with the qualities, the spiritual aspects of it, through my understanding and the understanding through the yoga of devotion. And it has nothing to do with willingly giving up anything, nothing. And it was kind of, he put it, he said he didn't say ineffable, but it was very hard to describe. He said it was the last thing to go for most people who, in terms of becoming free, because it's you become one with that which is. You are no longer, there is nothing else. It's like if you're in a desert, there's nothing else but that water, that oasis. I mean, everything has vanished, Anyhow, so, people had a hard time with that. Yeah. So great. Letting go. So, and the third thing is self-compassion. I want to share something with you. I've been sharing on the last few podcasts that I've been doing, because we did one podcast I did with my old partner, David Silver, and just using actually our Tibetan teachers for the most part, that were really fond of, to do what a bunch of this book does that you've written, which is dealing with the anxiety, the uncertainty that we are in. And so much pretty heavy stuff going on in many aspects of our lives, our personally and our socially and economically and culture, the whole thing, the polarity and so on. So I'm quoting for just a wonderful woman named Amanda Gilbert. When you talk about self-compassion, the moment I began to welcome my unwanted guests with kindness, sending metta towards each thought, feeling, and corner of sadness in my heart, is when I felt the first taste of real healing in my life. Meeting what is present with kindness teaches us the profound lesson of letting go into our human experience, even into all of the unwanted stuff. Ultimately, it gives us the resources of compassion, big-heartedness, or as His Holiness would call it, warm-heartedness, and inclusivity. So much so that I come to call self-kindness a practice of radical inclusion. Isn't that a great... I mean, I don't think you're saying much different, anything much different, but talk about self-compassion. Because to me, that has to be the key. We have so much self-hate, us as individuals in the West, particularly when we're not getting the brass ring, and that brass ring can simply be a consistent meditation practice or something like that. I mean, we're not talking about the biggest things, the smallest things, and that we take ourselves to task. Someone once said, if you talk to anybody else the way you talk to yourself, you wouldn't have any friends.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Self-compassion.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, going back, it just reminded me of, the Olympics, watching the Olympics, and they had all these interviews with these athletes, and it was remarkable to me. I could just see how tortured actually many of them were. Like you can see why mental health is becoming a hot topic for these athletes.
Yeah.
Because man, probably not all of them, but so many of the ones who you could hear were so hard on themselves. They were so hard on themselves, and that they're almost like a magnified version of, I think, of what happens with all of us. Again, just because of to some degree, it's our genetics, just the programming in our minds that has allowed us to survive as a species. And specifically the fact that what has helped us survive is that we're little threat detection machines. That is what we have evolved to be good at. Like we are really good at pinpointing threats in our environment.
Yeah.
Because for the vast majority of human history, that's why the people who were good at that survived. The people who were bad at that did not. And guess who passed down their genes? So it's not an accident, that we're anxious, we're depressed, we're reactive, we have a short temper, whatever it is. There's different versions of that. It feels personal, but it's not. Like this is just our genetics doing their thing, but in a world that's radically different than our ancestors ever lived in. On top of that, doing the kind of stuff we're talking about, it always sounds so peachy and rosy and wonderful when you hear about it, when you hear other people talking about it, when you read about it. And the reality is that it's hard. The things that humans hate above all else is uncertainty. We don't like unfamiliarity. We don't like change. We like to know exactly what's going on. And it's like we're entering in doing this spiritual work where we're tapping into these qualities of our own being that are beyond the conceptual mind. The conceptual mind can never really quite get a handle on it. We're entering into territory that not only is unfamiliar, it's never going to be familiar to the conceptual mind. The conceptual mind is never going to be able to get its arms around that. And so it's like the mind is just trying to do its thing. And that's anxiety provoking. In fact, if you go back and read Buddhist sutras, like the earliest Buddhist scriptures, that's oftentimes the Buddha is talking about that as a reaction and a response to actually tapping in to the true nature of reality, and the true nature of our minds is fear and anxiety for these same reasons. So that was thousands of years ago that was happening to people. And then you layer on all the stuff that's going on now in the world, our devices, technology, the programming from the media and from, people using principles of neuroscience, to market us things, which programs our mind to think certain ways. I mean, just all this stuff is, it just doesn't make it easy. And so I think doing these practices takes a tremendous amount of courage, patience, which we already talked about, and then just being kind to ourselves. The way I think about it, just to kind of a final thought, is there's a healthy discomfort and an unhealthy discomfort. And when you do these practices, we're kind of in the space of like up against that edge. And part of the discernment that we need to develop is sometimes it's like a little too comfortable, and we might need to push up against the edge a little bit, let ourselves get a little uncomfortable. But a lot of the time, it's probably more common that we're a little over the edge of healthy discomfort, and we're now into unhealthy discomfort. But it feels like failure from a spiritual sense if we need to pull back, if we need to take a break, whatever it is we need to do for ourselves. But actually, that is the wise thing to do from a spiritual perspective in those moments. And it's really just learning to discern, when am I over that edge into unhealthy discomfort? And when is this actually a growth zone? Like yes, it's hard and it's challenging, but there's something to learn here. I'm growing. I'm discovering new things about myself, whatever. So I think that healthy, unhealthy discomfort is a really helpful, just kind of, kind of inner thermometer to have as you walk the path.
Yeah. And I believe that circumstances arise that immediately say, okay, this is over the line right, of discomfort, especially around health and so on and so forth. But I have seen Ram Dass, who almost died from a stroke and was in a wheelchair for 22 years, half paralyzed, turn that. He had the help of our guru for sure, allowing him to put into proper perspective how he could balance his life in a way that he was not going to get caught in, all the way not getting caught in pain. I mean, we were just at the retreat, and I think Krishnadas was talking about, did you ever hear him complain? And I said, no. I never heard him complain. He would actually lie about it to me when I asked, "How are you?" And "Oh, I'm fine." Of course, I knew he wasn't fine because I was talking to his caretakers. And I said that to him, and he said, "Oh, well, okay." And then he'd get about halfway into the list of things, and I go, "Okay, thank you." TMI on that.
I mean, that you mentioned the 16th Karmapa earlier. That's one of the kind of classic stories of modern Buddhism is the 16th Karmapa when he passed away in Chicago.
Yeah.
And like the whole hospital staff that worked on the floor where he was, almost became devotees because this is a man dying of like a very painful form of cancer. And he was taking care of them, and they knew that. I mean, they could see that, like at a certain point, and that he was fine and he was there to take care of them, even though his body obviously was in tremendous pain. And yeah,
shows us the potential for sure.
Yeah,
right. I mean, that's again the amazing thing about the fortune of being with a teacher who is, at the very least, not focused on himself. I mean, when I first met Ram Dass, and he had an ability over many years. It didn't come to the kind of fruition that we saw once he lived in Maui and he, halfway through his stroke thing. But when I first met him, he put himself aside, and it just engendered a trust in me in that moment. That was a powerful inspiration to go forward on the path. I mean, it took me all the way to India, Another thing that came out of our retreat, which we were talking about bodhicitta there, actually. And I'm just quoting you, the Dalai Lama, echoing many great masters, teaches that affirming the altruistic intention of bodhicitta to begin your meditation is the most transformative part of the practice, even if it's just a few moments. We can practice mindful breathing for decades or chant millions of mantras, but if we haven't reflected on our motivation, then all these other practices will be of limited benefit. We won't tap their full potential without linking them to the compassionate motivation of bodhicitta. And we went through this. Anyhow, just give us just a little, as we have to close here in a few, around bodhicitta. I mean, it really, without that heart, the wisdom in the heart, I'm shocked when I still see people that are so rigorous in their practice, yet when they're out of their practice, they're complaining or they're stern or they're not open or they're, whatever it may be, not to be judgmental, but I mean, it's happened to myself. And I see this as to keep this in mind is the great panacea. It's what this book that I did with Duncan, in the end, it was about generosity and compassion. That's what is transforming to get you into, as His Holiness talks about, the altruistic perspective. You talk about
absolutely. I mean, it's such an incredibly powerful part of the practice. I mean, in a nutshell, it's wisdom and compassion. The wisdom is that open space of being that gradually opens into pure awareness and, the full depth of our being. And then compassion is, at the beginning, it's really seeing that just we're not in this alone and expanding the motivation for doing the practice to see that everybody is suffering. Everybody's caught, in this loop and stuck in these patterns. And at the same time, it's as much as seeing how we can all get stuck as seeing the potential, seeing that everybody has this awakened nature as well. And it's right there. I mean, it's just like, it's almost like right on the edge, the periphery of our vision, that we just need to like turn our heads a bit and we can see it. So seeing that awakened nature in everyone and everything, and then that becomes the motivating path, or the motivating part of the path. I mean, for me, this is, it's such a huge part of my practice. I mean, even just before we hopped on, and even a few times throughout, I just popped to mind. But, before we logged on here, it's just like a simple practice that's so easy to do, but so profound and helpful. It's just to pause and say, okay, I could go on this podcast and be like, oh, I'm going to sound really smart, and I hope people buy my book, or I hope, a million different things about me. Mm. And for me, what I do is, and this is maybe a little TMI, like this is actually what I think to myself. May anybody who hears this, may they hear exactly what they need to hear right now that is going to help them get in touch with their own awakened nature. Mm. And if they have any doubt, any negative thoughts, may they have them about me. If they want to think a bunch of crap, may they think that about me, but may they have inspiration in these teachers and teachings that we're talking about. May they have confidence in themselves, and they may, and it just has a way of shifting it, because it's so easy to carry all this self-interest wherever we go, and it just colors everything we do. Yeah. And when we just start thinking, when we start coming to situations and relationships, not for the world to fill us up and to meet our needs, but with this fundamental understanding that we are enough, we have enough, and now we have enough that we can share. I mean, it's just a win-win. We're just primed to hopefully to help others and do some good in the world, and we don't feel empty inside either. So it's just it's so simple, but it's such a profound practice.
Why don't you give us a little pause meditation that can be how you talk to yourself? You want to share that?
Sure. Yeah, I would love to. Well, I love to always just start with a moment of being, which is not even meditating. Just take a moment wherever you are listening to this. Don't even have to be in the perfect posture. Just take a moment to simply rest your mind. Just be for a few moments. Allow everything in your mind, everything in your body, everything in the world around you to be as it is. No need to change or improve anything. No need to do anything. And in this space of being, just notice the richness that is already here. The simple presence of awareness, the knowing quality of your own mind. It's here every single moment. You can't improve it because it's already perfect. Just be that knowing presence. Awareness is like the open space of the sky, and it can accommodate anything and everything. So just let any thoughts, feelings, sensations, perceptions, just let it all flow through awareness. Again, no need to change, fix, or improve anything. Just rest. And now recognizing that all beings have this pure nature, pure awareness at the heart of their being. And you can form the aspiration that everything you do in your life from this point forward be to help all beings to recognize this. So everything you say, everything you think, everything you do, may it be a cause for all beings to discover this pure nature. May all beings discover their true home within. Okay.
Great pause. Thank you.
Little mini meditation.
Yeah. We have an app, a Ramdas Be Here Now app, and we have what we call little moments. It's like psychedelic imperception. You can't put your finger on anything and it just runs through without you putting any kind of projection on it. Microdose. And so this is perfect. Microdose, Cortland.
Microdosing awakening.
Yeah. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me back on.
Yeah, no, it's so great. Everybody, of course, we will link up the book. Here's the book. And we will link it up so you can order. When is it out? Soon.
I think 2 weeks, week and a half.
Right after.
Very soon. The
Labor
3rd
Day,
of September.
2024.
Whatever that is. 3rd of September.
Yeah. And some of the other books that we did talk about, and the other people like Tulku Urgyen Rinpoche, we've mentioned his biography, which is extraordinary book to read.
Yes.
Before, but I think we'll put it in there again, and everybody else. Again, not to mention Mingyur Rinpoche, and. What's the book called when he went over the wall? AWOL.
In love with the world.
In love with the world.
Yeah. That's a fantastic
really
book.
Amazing. We will see you all next time. This is Mindrolling on Be Here Now Network. Go to BeHereNowNetwork.com, and there is a wonderful array of different podcasters and teachers. And we just put up Krishnamurti. Cortland. We're putting Krishnamurti talk.
Oh, that's amazing.
So, with Ramdas, Alan Watts, and Krishnamurti, we've got some OGs in there.
Those are the OGs.
Yeah, so there we are. So everybody, we'll see you next time. Again, thank you.
Thank you so much.